A reading of Animism by Graham Harvey. So this is the book Animism, Respecting the Living World. And this video will just be the preface and acknowledgements. Animists are people who recognise that the world is full of persons, only some of whom are human, and that life is always lived in relationship with others. Animism is lived out in various ways that are all about learning to act respectfully, carefully and constructively towards and among other persons. Persons are beings rather than objects who are animated and social towards others, even if they're not always sociable. Animism may involve learning how to recognise who is a person and what is not, because it is not always obvious, and not all animists agree that everything that exists is alive or personal. However, Animism is more accurately understood as being concerned with learning how to be a good person in respectful relationships with other persons. This may be a surprising opening for those who expected a discussion of religion as a belief in spirits, but this older use of the term animism is not the primary focus of this book. However, it is discussed in the first chapter as a short prelude to the exciting and interesting possibilities to be found in considering the worldviews and lifeways identified by a small but growing number of scholars of religions and cultures as the new animism. Broadly speaking, there are two kinds of animism, or more accurately, the word animism is used in two ways. The older usage refers to a putative concern with knowing what is alive and what makes a being alive. It alleges a belief in spirits or non-empirical beings and or a confusion about life and death among some indigenous people, young children or all religious people. Sometimes it is party to the assertion of a confusion between persons and objects or between humans and other than human beings. It may also be part of a theory about the origins of religions and or the nature of religion itself. The newer usage refers to a concern with knowing how to behave appropriately towards persons, not all of whom are human. It refers to the widespread indigenous and increasingly popular alternative understanding that humans share this world with a wide range of persons, only some of whom are human. While it may be important to know whether one is encountering a person or an object, the really significant question for animists of the new kind is how persons are to be treated or acted towards. Discussion of these discourses, points of view, practices and possibilities aids attempts to understand worldviews and lifeways that are different in various ways from those typically inculcated and more or less taken for granted in Western modernity. The chief purpose of this book is to consider and discuss the implications of taking seriously intimations that the term person applies not only to humans and human-like beings, ancestors and some deities, but to a far wider community. Many academics have jettisoned the term animism from their critical, technical and scholarly vocabulary. They consider it irredeemably compromised by the dubious role it played in early anthropological theorising and religious polemic. I would agree with this assessment, but for the fact that the term has escaped the constrictions imposed upon it by its colonial origins. Animism has taken on a new life among various communities who find it useful in labelling much of what is important or interesting to them. Indeed, some people are happy to introduce themselves as animists. Furthermore, following these changes, realignments and adoptions, some academic researchers have found animism helpful as a critical term in debates of current importance. They demonstrate that the term, understood in the new way, can introduce topics of conversation that may otherwise be missed. This book, being primarily interested in the new animism, spends little time with and devotes little space to the early uses of the term. However, the time and space that it does concede to such false starts is helpful both as a backdrop and as a prelude to more useful debates. Seeing the past helps us to see what has changed, is changing, or really ought to be changed. For example, the old animism not only gets the facts wrong, but also carries assumptions that preserve colonialist and dualist worldviews and rhetoric that deserves to be contested. More positively, reflection on the new animist worldviews and practices could contribute to debates about, for example, consciousness, environment and ethics in a number of disciplines and subjects. It may even prove to be exciting in revealing, as if it were hidden, that there are a number of vital alternatives to the modernist Western culture that uses and exploits other persons. Therefore, animism is worth considering, A, because it exists, B, because it addresses contemporary issues and debates, and C, because it clarifies in various ways the argument that the project of maternity is ill-conceived and dangerously performed. Systems and stories. Since it is easy to be misunderstood and even easier to unthinkingly mislead, it is important to confront the dangerous temptation to systematise. Sometimes academics put things in neatly labelled boxes. This is a destructive process because the things academics deal with are often very much alive. They do not belong in boxes, nor do they always survive there. Some refuse to stay in the boxes alone and tamed, awaiting a single discipline or methodology to describe and explain them. Great weights of authority, theory and jargon have to be placed on the boxes to keep the living things under control. Subduing them or pinning them on boards can be a last resort for those academics who do not want all their secrets to get away. This is one way to do academic work. What follows is not intended to be another labelled box, another neat category to be applied to the lifeless objects of academic scrutiny. My intention is to take a problematic label that is open to various interpretations, some more hopeful and helpful than others, and worry about its applicability, utility, implications and reference. Labels can be helpful in the same way that names can be. They can aid recognition, establish communication, permit familiarity and enable mutual understanding. But names, even very good names, do not say everything that needs saying. They are not stories, and they can be misleading. So this book argues that despite a history of problematic use or abuse, the term animism can aid our conversations more than it has so far. This argument and book will only succeed if they generate more debate in the arena into which they enter. Real dialogues have no end but only open up further possibilities in the ever-unfolding evolution of life and knowledge. With careful vigilance and regular refinement, I argue here that the term animism can play a more active role than ever before within the study of religions and other ethnographic disciplines, and also that not all of its uses are valuable or accurate. The term clearly began as an expression of a nest of insulting approaches to indigenous peoples and to the earliest putatively religious humans. It was and sometimes remains a colonialist slur. However, it can also draw attention to significant, even central matters in the lifeways and worldviews of particular communities. Alongside other contested critical terms, animism can help us know and do better. Similarly, and to put things in a way perhaps more appropriate to animism than to academia, no single story is ever final, complete, sufficient and all-embracing. Every story can be told another way, often becoming radically different in the telling. There are always other stories that say no to the one that only recently enthralled and convinced us. Evidence that seems to support an argument can always be countered by something contrary. Just as we are enjoying the waves of a particle as a particle hits us. Just as we are enjoying the waves, a particle hits us. In stories, as in life, things are not always what they seem. People are not always what they seem. At the same time, there is an everyday, taken-for-granted obviousness about animism. How could this not be the case when that which is alive is the rock you are holding or standing on, the animal you are hunting, the cloud that waters the corn you are tending, or the tree you are sheltering beneath? But animisms are, at the same time, capable of powerful expression and deep thoughtfulness, as befits such profound encapsulations of the way the world is. If everything we humans encounter might in fact be a living person, the implications and ramifications are immense. It is this that generates the particular etiquettes, protocols and dialogues that are at the heart of the lived realities that are animisms. This takes us to the heart of the difference between the old and the new uses of animism. The old usage constructed animists as people who did not or could not distinguish correctly between objects and subjects, or between things and persons. The new animism names worldviews and lifeways in which people seek to know how they might respectively and properly engage with other persons. Knowing that people, humans and other than human, can be deceitful and devious, and that there are tricksters and antisocial persons in the world, means that it is important to look out for masks, illusions, deceptions, tricks of perception and false claims. Knowing that relationships and reality are fraught with ambiguity means that it is important to attend to stories and their endless ramifications, rather than seek the definitive closure of creeds or conclusions. Knowing that some people might want to eat us means that it is wise to be cautious as well as constructive in our respectful encounters with other persons. All this may establish the need for knowledge gained from experience and practice skill, as well as from the education provided by elders or disseminated in tradition. It may also be necessary to call upon the advice and companionship of those who see through different eyes or know by different senses, shamans, for example. This is to reiterate that respect is a blend of cautious and constructive acting towards other persons, and even towards things which might turn out to be persons. The old usage of animism was entangled with Western worldviews that considered the myriad multiplicity evident everywhere, internally, externally, physically, mentally, naturally, culturally, microscopically, macroscopically, to be problematic. Two solutions have been proffered. The first has been to insist on the underlying unity of all that exists. Such a unity may be located in a single creative God, a yet-to-be-discovered grand unifying theory, idealism, materialism or mysticism. The second has been to dichotomise everything and treat all that we encounter as a confrontation of dualities such as us, them, male, female, light, dark, spiritual, physical, mind, matter, truth, error, time, eternity, life, death, persons, objects, objectivity, subjectivity, human, non-human, self, other, and good, evil. The new usage of animism arises from respectful relationships with indigenous and other cultures, in which boundaries are permeable and putative opposites are necessarily engaged in various ways. Instead of crying one or two, animists celebrate plurality, multiplicity, the many, and their entwined, passionate entanglements. Instead of the hero who struggles against one or other side of things in an attempt to discern the underlying truth, animist stories present tricksters who multiply possibilities in increasingly amusing ways. All of this is to say that all dualisms are, at best, provisional and or contingent. The cutting edge or critical point of this consideration is not merely in providing a better way of describing alterities, strange, alien or foreign cultural phenomena, but the possibility of reconsidering the validity and value of the dominant modernist culture. My approach in what follows is to provide a series of related and resonating views of different ways of considering and enacting the implications of animism. Because the phenomena to which this term properly and usefully apply are diverse and unsystematic, I aim to avoid systematising what is more adequately storied. Nonetheless, all that follows should demonstrate that the term animism is of considerable value as a critical academic term for a style of religious and cultural relating to the world. This may be seen in particular complexes of worldviews and lifeways, or as elements within larger traditions. That is, not only are there animist cultures, but there are also cultures within which it is possible to act occasionally as an animist. All that follows is founded on two matters that deserve some brief consideration: a dialogical methodology and an understanding of what the term persons might mean. Dialogue, research as conversation. Consideration of animism is valuable not only as an attempt to understand particular cultures and subcultures. Thick description, rich ethnography, empiricism and phenomenology, i.e. saying what phenomena present themselves with some negotiated consideration for insiders or adherents, are important in various ways. However, research often leads to more than an understanding of others. Any ethnological engagement with thoroughly relational animists must entail reflection on the methods used to collect and consider data. Happily, academic methods have evolved since the old animism was postulated by an earlier generation of scholars. Being explicit about methods and practices of research is especially important to the current generation of scholars who are far less certain about objectivity. Today, words like dialogue, reflexivity, and reactivity, which might just be academic versions of more everyday terms like conversation, respect, and relationship, are integral to academic discourse. Michael Bakhtin's discussion of the dialogic imagination is an obvious source for all who are inspired by these terms. Contributors to Young and Goulet's Being Changed, Spickard, Landry's and Maguire's Personal Knowledge and Beyond, and Blaine, Ezzy and Harvey's Researching Paganisms are among the brightest examples of this positive trend. In this book, the terms dialogue and dialogical serve as Humpty Dumpty's terms, words that are paid extra because they are made to work extra hard. In fact, these words are paid extra by being trusted to carry a wide range of reciprocally reinforcing meanings. As resonant synonyms of ways in which respect is enacted in relationships and conversations with other persons, dialogue and dialogical might well evoke some of the defining characteristics of animist lifeways, but they also challenge academics to find better ways to relate to others. For example, Irving Hallowell argued that truly objective research would respect the point of view that not only human, but also other than human persons are members of indigenous communities. If so, academics need to attend to the ways in which wisdom might be sought in conversation with all sorts of persons. Pursuit of such dialogical conversations with particular indigenous communities will include learning about processes and protocols. For example, the occurrence of dialogue not only in speech events but also in ceremonial and other performative enactments is important to Thomas Buckley's argument that what Yurok people do is a mode of discourse, of oppositions, simultaneously yearning towards wholeness, but necessarily open-ended and defiant of closure. Similarly, David Turner's work proffers a theoretical reading which includes an Aboriginal expression of the terms of a perspective that runs antithesis, thesis, plurality, or nothingness, being, relationship. This might be applied both to the understanding that animism has become an antithesis in most academic discourses and to the possibility that the Cartesian inheritance underlying many claims to academic objectivity is antithetical. What theses and pluralities, existences and relationships might emerge in such considerations is, in many respects, one of the most significant questions of this book. I've argued elsewhere for further consideration and enactment of a radical version of dialogue that might, in honour of my Maori hosts in Ngati Puru and Ngati Ranana, be called guesthood. This entails not only recognition but celebration of academic presence among and full participation with our hosts, properly understood as those who might refuse us access and guesthood. Furthermore, it entails conversation with and learning from knowledgeable hosts and some explicit form of reciprocation that benefits these hosts. At the same time, with heavy reliance on Robert Warrior, it is important to note that this book does not attempt to give voice to the voiceless, which would be risible fantasy. Rather, it reflects on the implications of various conversations about living as persons which fumble towards possibilities as yet insufficiently considered by academics. Animisms are theories, discourses and practices of relationship, of living well, of realising more fully what it means to be a person, and a human person, in the company of other persons, not all of whom are human, but all of whom are worthy of respect. Recognising persons. Much of the argument of this book hinges on the question of what a person is. Words are always defined by their use in particular contexts, and their meanings vary as particular segments of their associations are selected and stressed. Since this discussion is interested in the discourse, practice and implications of animism among diverse cultures and communities, persons is another Humpty Dumpty word, carrying a heavy load of meanings, associations, possibilities and potentiality. At the heart of the matter is the opposition between persons and objects. Persons are those with whom other persons interact, with varying degrees of reciprocity. Persons may be spoken with. Objects, by contrast, are usually spoken about. Persons are volitional, relational, cultural and social beings. They demonstrate intentionality and agency with varying degrees of autonomy and freedom. That some persons look like objects is of little more value to an understanding of animism than the notion that some acts, characteristics, qualia, and so on may appear human-like to some observers. Neither material form nor spiritual or mental faculties are definitive, except in the old animism, where they are the problem. People become animists by learning how to recognise persons and, far more important, how to engage with them. The ubiquity of terms like respect and reciprocity in animist discourse demonstrates that the key identifier of a person is someone who responds to or initiates approaches to other persons. In the philosophical language of many religious cultures, person is applicable not only to humans but to various significant other than human beings, e.g. deities and angels. Animists recognise a much wider range of persons. There is nothing in these discourses that should be understood as implying, let alone asserting, that humans are the primary exemplars of personhood. Halliwell's term, other than human, person, celebrates two facts but does not confuse them. First, it arises from animists' engagement with a world that is full of persons, only some of whom are human. Secondly, it arises from an animist acknowledgement that humans' most intimate relationships are had with other humans. Perhaps rock persons might speak of other than rock persons, while tree persons might speak of other than tree persons. Such phrases, if unwieldy, are not intended to privilege any class of person, but draw attention to degrees of relationality. It may be necessary to note forcefully that in the following discussion, the terms person and other than person, human person, are not intended to replace words like spirit or deity. They are not references to any putative greater than human or supernatural beings, unless this is specified in some other way. Animists may acknowledge the existence and even presence of deities or discarnate persons, if that is what spirits means, but their personhood is a more general fact. Particular groups of animists speak of living within diverse communities of persons of many species or nations. It is possible, but rare, to recognise power, prestige, or wisdom only among particular species, e.g. deities, rocks, or trees. While some species may have abilities beyond that of their neighbours, most often particular groups within every species are considered to hold and or disseminate power or wisdom. The most common example of such persons must be elders, long-lived persons of whatever variety. All this being so, animists live a theory of personhood and selfhood that radically challenges the dominant point of view, which is that of modernity. If intelligence, rationality, consciousness, volition, agency, intentionality, language and desire are not human characteristics that might be mistakenly projected onto non-humans, but are shared by humans with all other kinds of persons, then animism's promise to contribute significantly to a variety of debates that will be of interest to a host of heirs, prisoners, customers, clients and scholars of Western world views. For example, they might posit a different relationship between mind and matter, consciousness and physicality, culture and nature than that enshrined in Cartesian dualism. As Nigel Rapport and Joanna Overing write, to reunite the body, the sensual, acting, feeling, emotive aspects of self, with the thinking, language-knowing self, creates havoc with most modernist versions of culture. As should only be expected, debates today on the implications of a more phenomenological approach to culture for the future development of anthropology have a certain edge, a passion, and often a political as well as academic challenge to them. This seems true not only of culture, but also of knowledge, persons, nature, performance, and other terms found in academic critical vocabularies. Equally, it seems applicable not only to anthropology, but to other ethnological and phenomenological disciplines, as well as to philosophers and scientists interested in consciousness, embodiment, and other issues. Placing humans within a community of persons rather than at its peak challenges claims to human uniqueness, whether expressed in religious, creationist or scientific evolutionist discourse. Outline. This book is split into 4 parts. The first is a single chapter surveying the various uses of animism as a label for widely varying phenomena. In particular, the use is made of the term in Edward Tyler's theory of the nature of religion and in Irving Hallowell's discussion of Ojibwe ontology. However, other significant scholars and theories are also surveyed. While this book is primarily interested in the new animism associated with the work of Hallowell, Nurit, Bird David and others, it is concerned not only with ethnography, but with the implications of animist lifeways and worldviews for a range of issues and questions debated by different academic disciplines. Part 2 contains 4 case studies of people in various sorts and sizes of groups, whose actions and self-understanding represent examples of phenomena for which the term animism is now being used, illustrating some of the diverse ways in which animism is experienced, inculcated, displayed, enacted, narrated or enshrined. Language, location, art, leadership, cosmology, land rights, subsistence, teaching and ritual are especially significant examples here. These selected expressions of animism enable greater clarity about the variety and implications of animist lifeways. At the heart of this is an argument about the contribution Indigenous and nature-centred worldviews and lifeways can make to understandings of personhood, self, community and means of relating to, communicating and reciprocating with others, including lands. These case studies should not be mistaken for comparisons between different religious cultures, still less for an attempt to synthesise and collapse differences into a new system. My intention is not to compare but to build up a set of pictures of various phenomena to which the label animism usefully refers. Not only does the label highlight something central in the experience and understanding of these groups, but such experiences and understandings illustrate the contribution of animism to consideration of language, land rights, art and performance. Part 3 engages with some of the implications and ramifications of animism. It reflects on some of the challenges that animists face and some of the ways in which animists respond. Some of these challenges intersect with problems confronting all persons and are of interest to various academic and popular debates. The aim here, then, is to consider some potential or actual problems that arise from animist worldviews and require responses to make animism livable in practice. To this end, I not only reflect on conversations and celebrations with animists in various places, but also draw on ethnographies published by others who have engaged with these matters. Far from naive, animists engage responsively or proactively with the real world, in which, if they're correct, people must eat other persons, may be in conflict with other persons, will encounter death, and will need to balance the demands made by a series of more or less intimate and or more or less hostile relationships. Sometimes they draw on established traditions or cultural discourses and practices. Sometimes they have to be innovative and creative. At heart, this part of the book touches the cultural rather than instinctive nature of animists' worldviews and lifeways. There is no great barrier, and may be instead a substantial bridge between parts 3 and 4, the purpose of the latter being to ponder what might be gained by taking seriously animist understandings of the nature of the world, life, personhood, reality, and so on. Far from being a primitive, simplistic and irrational misunderstanding of the nature of life, animism has much to contribute to significant debates taking place in particular academic disciplines. Academia is sometimes justified as more than a quest for knowledge of the other and as an enterprise of critical reflection on itself and its familiar context. With the continuing growth of vibrant assertions of self-determination among Indigenous peoples and some initial movements towards post-colonialism, it is politicians, industrialists, including agro-industrialists, geneticists, the heritage and tourism industry, and many other interested parties face up to the implications of their work and worldviews. This book is not intended as yet another curiosity to be safely viewed, or yet another collection of odd facts that might be helpful in winning a trivia quiz. Unless we're willing to be challenged, or to make changes, We ought not to waste so much of other people's time asking them questions that must often seem simplistic and insane. It is, for example, far too early to speak of post-colonial as if it referred to anything but a desirable goal, an ambition to be worked towards. Like other lifeways and worldviews, animism is not only an enchanting vision of a world that might be, it is a considered and cultivated interaction with the world, in which there are better or worse ways in which to relate and act. In addition to an interest in discussing animist worldviews and lifeways, reinvigorating a term that could again be of critical value, and demonstrating that animists have much to contribute to significant debates and concerns, this book argues that animists proffer rich alternatives to modernity. This is not an exercise in primitivism, because animism is far from primitive, nor is it about pre-modernity, because animism does not serve as a precursor to modernity. Rather, animism is one of the many vitally present and contemporary other than modern ways of being human. Modernity, rather than animism or any form of indigeneity, is exceptional among ways of being human in this world. Thus, in different places throughout the book, animist ways of being human are contrasted, sometimes vigorously, with modernity. In the conclusion, I align myself with Bruno Latour's statement, if not his whole argument, that we have never been modern. But I also concur with Zygmunt Bauman that the Nazi death factories fully expressed the devastating potential of the project of modernity. In positioning myself against the impossible dualism now emblematically associated with René Descartes, although actually asserted more strongly both before and since Descartes than by the philosopher himself, I position myself with other proponents of the idea that the culture of modernity has never entirely succeeded, despite vigorous attempts in obliterating alternative ways of being human and living in a world where all seeming dualities are entangled with one another. With David Abram, Mary Midgley, Linda Holler, Bev Clack and Glenn Martzes, among others, I seek a way to speak of and to celebrate all that we are as embodied, sensual, participative persons in a physical, sensuous, relational world and cosmos. With them and Erasim Coac, I seek a way of speaking that would be good, in the sense of life-affirming and enhancing, for all persons, human and other than human. With a host of Indigenous people, I seek to understand and enhance diverse ways of living that are respectful and life-affirming. In short, I argue that animism provides various ways of speaking, listening, acting, and being that achieve this with grace and beauty. Acknowledgements. A book that celebrates relationships and reflects on the importance of giving and receiving gifts really must begin by saying thank you, and it is a pleasure to do so, even if, as is likely, some gift of insight or direction may have been slipped to me so subtly that I cannot now name and thank the donor. Similarly, the interests and obsessions that have shaped the way I have researched for and presented this book are not entirely my own gift or fault. There are, therefore, likely to be many other names that should be added here. The responsibility for any oversight and for all other inadequacies is mine. I make no claim to simply record the experiences of others. Those with whom I've enjoyed talking, listening, dancing, sitting by fires, eating and travelling are articulate and able people. They represent themselves. It is as full participants in dialogical conversation and as respectful guests that we gain most understanding of that which we do not yet know. Because thinking is only part of the work required of those invited to become better people and better humans, it is important to ask where our thinking will lead us next. My academic interest in animism arose during time spent among pagans celebrating vibrantly alive places, especially but not only in the English counties of Northumberland and Wiltshire. The title of my book about the diverse paganisms of the contemporary world, Listening People, Speaking Earth, reflects that interest. I've continued to enjoy the company of pagans, especially animist pagans, and am particularly grateful to Adrian, Andy, Arthur, Barry, Carol, Dennis, Doug, Gordon, Jenny, Joyce, Lynn, Penny, Robert, Selina, Sylvie, Tim and Wren. Among the ancestors I'm glad to honour Wally Hope. Research for this book took me far from the sometimes threatened woods and hills of home. I've been greatly privileged to receive hospitality and find friendship in many places. I offer thanks and respect to all concerned for all that they have taught me and for all the hope that I hope to more fully understand and incorporate into my living. I'm particularly grateful to Peter and his family, friends and colleagues among Ngati Porou and in Auckland, Bob and John of the Institute for Aboriginal Development, Dave and Greg, and Jerry and the Maori community in Alice Springs, Rick and Becky, Larry and Claire, and Brett at Claire, Linda and Bob, Nick and Charlotte, Tinker and Anne at Lac Le Flambau, Sakam Mao Missal at Mia Pukek, and Tony and Dottie, Roe, Mark, Philip, Nadia, Che, and the rest of the Wanahu, Nagati Renana. Among academic ancestors, my debt to Irving Halliwell will be clear throughout the book. It's not only his coining and use of the term other than human persons, attempting to convey what he learned from his Ojibwe hosts, for which I'm grateful, the respect with which he engaged in ethnography and the clarity of his challenge to what is often taken for objectivity in academia are also important. Elaborations and continuations of Halliwell's work in the writings of Ken Morrison and Terry Smith have been invaluable, and correspondence with both has been enlightening. I also owe a special debt of gratitude to Nurit Bird David and to Eduardo Viveras de Castro, whose various stimulating publications not only revisit but also restore respect to the term animism. Similarly, Debbie Rose's publications and emails have been enormously informative and inspiring, especially but not only in relation to totemism. Conversations and collaborations with Andy Letcher, Barb Davey, Brian Bates, Brian Morris, Bron Taylor, Chaz Clifton, David Turner, Doug Ezzy, Douglas Davis, Jeffrey Samuel, Jenny Blaine, Jim Cox, Michael York, Patrick Curry, Sarah Pike, Susan Greenwood and Sylvie Shaw have enhanced my appreciation of the resonances not only of animism but also nature and nature religions. David Turner's influence will be apparent to those who share my considerable enthusiasm for his work. Erazim Kohak's discussion of what it might mean for a philosopher to talk with trees, David Abrams' resonant call to remember our sensuous intimacy with Earth, Val Plumwood's compelling consideration of what ecological rationality might entail, and Linda Holler's clarity about erotic immorality and schizophrenic modernity have been important encouragements to make clear the importance of what it might mean to live a good life now. Conversations with research students who I'm privileged to be supervising have enriched my understanding of the wide relevance and reach of some of what I've been thinking about, especially embodiment and consciousness. The new animism has generated some important academic debates, but it is perhaps better expressed and more joyfully celebrated in the books of writers as various as Alan Garner, Leslie Silko, Barbara Kingsolver, Alice Walker, Daniel Quinn, David Abram, Linda Hogan, Patricia Grace, Chinu Achebe, Ursula Le Guin, Louise Erdrich and Marge Piercy. Thanks to Sally Bron and Larry for introducing some of these. There are, of course, many others who could be mentioned here. I'm not alleging that they are all animists, though some may be, but that they reintroduce an animist world. Nor are they alone in inspiring my reflections. Rather, I cite them as preeminent examples of novelists, nature writers, philosophers, indigenisers and provocateurs of change. The clarity of their visions and the boldness of their feeling for a world that is more alive than that envisioned by globalised, capitalised modernity not only facilitate contemplation of other ways of living, but sometimes provide words with which to express new thoughts and possibilities. In all this, they share common ground with a host of Indigenous storytellers, writers, filmmakers, dancers, artists and tricksters. A full discussion of such contemporary Indigenous elaborations of traditional animist worldviews and lifeways would be another large book, one I'd love to read. Much of my understanding and argument is firmly rooted in ethnology, spending time with people, listening, participating and guesting. But I cite a lot of books and articles. This is not an attempt to bolster a weak argument or claim a pre-packaged authority. It is an indication of wide and rich debates that have already begun and are worth pursuing. Books, as John Milton said, contain a potency of life in them and invite respectful, careful and constructive engagement. I regret only discovering Caroline Rooney's important work as I was preparing this book's index. African and other Indigenous and creative literatures certainly deserve a fuller discussion than the brief mention in Chapter 1. Research for this book was generously funded by King Alfred's College, Winchester, my employer until October 2003, which also provided sabbatical leave for that purpose. I'm especially grateful to my colleagues in TRS for their support despite the extra work that fell on them. I wish they could have left with me. I am also grateful to my new colleagues at the Open University for expanding opportunities for research, debate and reflection. It has been a pleasure working with Michael Dwyer, Christopher Hurst and Wendy Lochner, the publishers. The reports of 5 more or less anonymous reviewers have greatly aided me in improving this book. I'm enormously grateful to Jonathan Hoare for his careful copy editing. Of course, all remaining faults are entirely my own. As ever and always, I'm particularly grateful to my wife Molly, Not only has she suffered my prolonged absences, especially those I've spent at the computer, she's also enhanced the diversity of life around us in the homes, gardens and ponds that we have shared with an increasing abundance of lively beauty. I know some truths of animism because Molly animates my life, and a relationship is what matters to me most.